Tervetuloa Nörttityttöjen videosarjaan, jossa haastatellaan kirjailijoita ja muita kiinnostavia ihmisiä. Tällä kertaa haastateltavana Mary Robinette Kowal. Mary, welcome, finally.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
So, congratulations on the Hugo and everything.
Thank you.
That was quite something.
It was very exciting.
I'm sure. Mary is most known for her Glamourist Histories book series, which is coming to a close, right?
That's right. The 5th book is coming up, and that's the last book in the series. So that comes out in April 28th in the United States, but I don't know when it will be out in other countries.
At some point. So, Glamourist Histories, for those of you who don't know, are basically Regency Fantasy, where I believe the first book was sold as Jane Austen with magic.
Yes. And then they get progressively more swashbuckling from there.
This is true. This is very true. What made you want to write specifically Regency Fantasy?
Well, I'm a longtime Jane Austen fan and have also always been a fantasy reader. That's, science fiction and fantasy is where my happy place is. And I just finished reading a giant epic fantasy and had picked up Persuasion by Jane Austen, which is my favorite of her books, for a reread, and hit the proposal scene and was just weeping the way I always weep when I get to that scene. And I thought, why is Jane Austen able to provoke such strong emotion, and really nothing is at stake in this book except, are these two going to get hitched? Whereas this other book, which had evil overlords, fate of the world, did not provoke the same strong emotion. And so I wanted to look at whether or not it was possible to do a small-scale, intimate family drama within fantasy. So a lot of people look at Shades of Milk and Honey and talk about it as me subverting Austen, and I'm like, no, actually, I was trying really hard to just do straight-up Austen and subvert fantasy by shoving it into a Jane Austen plot mold. And then once I had done that and established for myself, and it was a book I wanted to read, that it was possible to do that, then I felt like I could step out of the Austen plot mold and continue to explore the idea of intimate family drama while going through into the wider world.
Right. And you just shared the original outline, and it was very much like, well, Pride and Prejudice, for example.
Oh yeah, yeah. The original outline was very much straight ahead Regency Romance, and I wrote it during NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, and it was my first time writing a novel where I outlined it before I started. Usually what I would do prior to that is I would start writing, realize I had no idea where I was going, and then create an outline to kind of help myself along. And this one I sat down and did the outline first, so I was determined that I was going to stick with the outline. And partway through I realized that there was another ending that I was more interested in. But I thought, it's NaNoWriMo, I'm just gonna keep going. I don't have time to change the outline. I'll finish my 50,000 words and then I'll see. And I got to the end, went back and read what I'd written and was like, no, I was right the first time. I wanted that different ending, so I tossed about 20,000 words. And what I learned from doing that was that I actually do have time to revise the outline during the process, and that it's faster to revise the outline, and that it's more satisfying.
I bet. I'm really glad you did, because
yeah, can you imagine?
I love it.
Yeah, the love matches, for those of you who have not read them, are completely different than what I have in the outline. Completely different.
So you probably do research other than just reading Jane Austen novels. So how do you how do you approach your research? Because Regency is wide.
It is. So what I do at this point, it's a little bit easier because I've been writing in the books for in that universe for 5 years. But when I'm approaching any historical, because I've got two other novels coming out set in different eras, what I do first is I do fairly broad reading, just to get a sense of the era, and I do that sometimes. What I'll have is I'll have a synopsis, a um, loose idea of what I want the story to be, but a lot of the internal details aren't filled in yet. And so as I am reading, the things that I learn about the world will inform the way the plot actually unfolds. For instance, Ghost Talkers, which is the book that I'm working on right now, is set in 1916, the Battle of the Somme in Britain. Well, actually, lots of it is in France because Battle of the Somme. But before I started doing the research, I had no idea the enormous effect that World War I had on suffrage and women's rights. And so that's not in my synopsis at all, but it's very much informing the outline. So then once I have that sort of broad general base, then I start going and doing more specific research into particular areas. And then when I'm writing, if I hit something that's really specific, like a detail of clothing, the kind of pencil that they would be using in the era, or writing instrument, I just bracket it, writing instrument, bracket, and continue on. And then afterwards, I look it up, because if I stop to look up that kind of fine-grained detail, I'll just never write, because the research is so interesting. But I should say that I also research in parallel while I'm writing, that just because I've started the novel doesn't mean that I stop reading books from the period.
Right.
Or about the period.
Do you read fiction or nonfiction, or
both?
You mentioned on writing excuses that you go to court records.
Yes. Sometimes I'll go to court records for transcripts of the way of language. They are uneven in their reliability in terms of how accurately things are recorded, but it is a good place where you can frequently get word for word transcriptions of how people were actually speaking. Because as we know from the way we write today, we clean up the language and make it a little more dramatic. So what I'm doing when I'm the areas that I research, I read books written today about the period. I will read nonfiction in the period if I can find it, and I'll read fiction from the period. What I do not read are novels written today set in the period.
Right.
Because I know I get things wrong, and I know other authors get things wrong, and what I have to watch out for are incorrect facts sneaking into my brain as if they were correct. So the other reason I'll say that I read fiction from the period is not so much for the dialogue, but it gives you a really good sense of the sensibilities of an era, and where the scandals are and what was considered dramatic and exciting. And when I'm writing, I can try to make those aspects come alive for readers, which sometimes involves a little translation. Like, oh my goodness, he kissed her on the cheek. Shocking.
Or turn the other cheek.
Yes, yes. Like turning the table was a really good example. When you had a formal dinner, you would talk to the person on your left or right, depending on if you were a man or woman, and then they would turn the table and you would talk to the other person. So it was considered very rude at certain periods in history to talk across the table at someone else or to ignore your partner. And frequently you were waiting for the tables to turn.
Wow. Wow. That is weird.
Yeah.
You've done NaNoWriMo a lot. I think last year you were doing Kiss Me Twice.
Yes, I think that is what I was doing during Nano.
Yeah, are you doing NaNoWriMo again?
I am. I'm going to be doing Ghost Talkers this year.
Right.
Um,
So
so starting November 1st, I will dive into it. I have the first two chapters written because I had to write them um, to sell the book. And what I usually do is try to stay 3 chapters ahead of where people are reading. I should back up and say that one of the things that I do when I'm writing is that as I'm going along, I post chapters password protected on my website. So if you want to read along as I'm going, you can. The danger is sometimes that the books wind up changing. So sometimes you'll have me saying, retcon, pretend that this woman has been a man the entire time. It's fine. I'll fix it later. Or these two characters are now the same character. Just go with it. So you get that sometimes as I revise the outline.
this person died on the way to his
Yeah.
destination.
Yep. Just pretend it happened. Just please. And then I go back and fix it later. That's actually a trick I picked up from Jim Hines, which is that when he's writing and he decides to make a major change like that, he'll note it, and then he will continue writing forward as if he has already made the change instead of stopping to go back and make the change, which is kind of brilliant and really sped up my process a lot.
Wow. I have yet to master that technique. Can you talk a little bit about Ghost Talkers?
Sure. So Ghost Talkers, as I mentioned, is set in 1916, Battle of the Somme. And it's not at all in the Glamourist Histories universe. The premise here is that the British spiritualist movement worked pretty much exactly as advertised. So the British Intelligence Department has created something that they call the Spirit Corps, which is a group of mediums, and they imprint all of the soldiers going to the front that when they die, they have to report in. So they're getting instant troop updates. And the soldiers can, in addition to reporting what happened, they can also send a message home. So they can do their last words.
Wow.
And at the end of the first chapter, we discover that the Germans have figured out what they're doing and that they are actively trying to target the Spirit Corps. The challenge is that the soldiers are imprinted to return to a place because they can't be imprinted to return to a particular person because you have no idea who's going to be on shift.
Right.
So they can't move the Spirit Corps. So it's a race against the clock to try and figure out how the Germans, who told the Germans what's going on, because they figure there's probably a traitor someplace. Finding the traitor, stopping the attack, and with ghosts and mediums.
Nice. Hold on.
Sure.
Back to the Hugo. I do believe that all of your awards so far have been for science fiction. Is that right? Plus writing excuses.
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
What do you think that is?
Well, honestly, I think it's because there are 2 factors, I will say. One is that the Hugo Awards, while they are for science fiction and fantasy, are still primarily the voting audience's first love is science fiction. The second reason is something that I am doing, which is that since my natural instinct as a writer, I write all over the map. I write science fiction, I write fantasy, I will occasionally write horror. I like genre stories. I like the what if stories. So since I am writing historical fantasy in my novels, I am actively choosing not to write it in my short fiction because I want to. There's so much to explore, and I want to be exploring it. The other reason, I will say honestly, is that early on, and I've heard from editors that this is still the case, that editors at magazines don't see enough science fiction, that they see more fantasy stories coming in, and they specifically don't see enough science fiction from women.
Right.
So I made a very early choice to focus my short fiction on science fiction, partly for marketing reasons, because I thought that it would make it easier, it would give me more of a more marketability, it wouldn't be me turning in the same thing that everybody else was turning in. So that's largely why, I think.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You're also a puppeteer, professional puppeteer, I should say. What drew you to that?
I was actually just looking to see. Sometimes I have a puppet on my desk. Yep, I do actually. I keep the puppet on my desk because every now and then, when I'm doing a hangout, someone will have their child in the room.
Oh,
Not because I do.
Hi.
this is the puppet that sang Roxanne.
Yes. Yes, I think so. Roxanne! You don't have to put out the red light! Alright, that's enough.
So, and now that I've just shown my powerful, masterful skills there, yeah, so I was one of those kids who wanted to do everything, and puppetry combined everything I wanted to do. It combined writing, it combined acting, it combined music and sculpture and art, and it was just much like science fiction and fantasy. Also, it was very much a theater of possible. Everything is possible in puppetry. You can, you want a character to fly? No problem. You want a character to split in half? Easy. Transform into a demon? Piece of cake. We've done that for thousands of years. So it was just fascinating, and also I didn't realize this until later. Most of the stories that wind up being told in puppet theater are speculative fiction in some form or another.
That's true.
Because we can do the fantastic so easily, so much more easily than meat theater, which is our derogatory term for live human actors. Because puppeteers are actors. So we'll sometimes talk about puppet actor versus human actor, and then when we're in a snarky mood, we'll talk about meat actors.
So you were also just recently, within this year, you were with the Jim Henson companies. What was it? Training?
It was actually the Sesame Street Workshop Puppet Workshop, or Sesame Workshop Puppet Workshop. Anyway, it was hosted by Sesame Street, and they put out an open call for a master class for puppeteers. They had 300 applicants. They took 50 people, and I was one of the incredibly lucky 50. They divided us into two groups of 25. So it was amazing.
What does one do at a puppet camp or workshop?
Well, I should say it depends on the style of puppetry. This was video puppetry, so a lot of the emphasis was on working with the camera. They assumed that we had some basic skills because they had auditioned us. So we didn't do so much with lip sync and things like that. A lot of it was about refining the way in which we use the camera. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand about the puppet video relationship is that they think, they think of this as the puppet. This is not actually the puppet when you're doing video. The puppet is the image on the screen, and you're manipulating the image on the screen. You use this to control the image on the screen. So it is, we'll talk about it as a puppet, but the thing that you're actually manipulating is the image on the screen, because you can have two puppets that appear to be looking at each other. And so right now, these two puppets, these are my hands, they appear to be looking at each other, but if I rotate, you can see that they are nowhere near each other.
Right.
And you can do stuff like that where you're manipulating the image on the screen. A lot of it was things like walking to create the illusion of the floor, making sure that we had a solid understanding how to work with more than one person in a scene. So a lot of it was stuff that you would do in acting, but it was very specifically targeted at puppetry, and then some specific skills too that focus, making sure the puppet is looking at the camera and how to pop a focus immediately when you come onto a screen.
Right.
It was great.
I can imagine. I, I'm just so engrossed listening to you talk about
I'm like I could talk for days about it actually.
Sounds good. Although I think that you might have some writing to do.
I do have a little bit of writing to do.
So I think that's pretty much it. Unless you have something that you deeply wished I asked you.
I don't, but I will say, as a treat for your readers, that I am about to, in the next 10 minutes, for those people watching live, I'm about to post the outline for Glamour in Glass as well.
Oh.
Because Glamour in Glass, I actually did. It is a closer fit, closer match. The ending doesn't change, but you can see one of the things that I'll be talking about is that there is people talk about outliners versus pantsers as the two ends of this two types of writers. Some people outline, some people write by the seat of their pants or discovery write.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's actually a spectrum. So when you see the outline, if you compare it with the book, you can see that there are places where I was definitely discovery writing, because there are characters that are not mentioned in the outline at all. But it also gives me the framework as well. So I'm gonna post that in a few minutes.
Nice. Actually, I did think of one thing more that I wanted to ask you about. There's a green dress behind you that looks like a
yes.
beautiful dress. Is that one of yours? For the viewers who haven't been following Mary, she made her own Hugo dress, which was spectacular.
Thank you. It is also the dress that is on the cover of Noble Family, which is coming out soon. So yes, the green dress. I will say that it is not finished, although it's wearable and I've worn it. It's a green silk gauze, and I have been. My plan with this dress, I saw the material. Pomona green was this color that was very popular in the Regency. And I was like, I need that material, clearly. I have to do research for my novels.
Yes.
So one of the things that I've been curious about getting into is embroidery. So my plan on this dress is to do something called white work, which is usually white on white. In this case, it'll be white on green, but white work embroidery on it across the bosom and then at the hemline, which is where most of the embroidery happened. But I need to do things like the sleeves. The sleeves should be up and poofy, and I have to put some structure in there to make that happen because the material doesn't quite have enough structural integrity to do that.
Right.
But yeah, that's I'll just say, because I think this is actually good advice for writers, that writing started as a hobby. Puppetry started as a hobby, and then I added writing to be the hobby because I had puppetry. And as writing now, I've added Regency dressmaking as the hobby. And I think it's actually really important for an author to have a passion that is not writing, so that they have some external life and also something that can give them a release and a step away. Otherwise, if your passion is writing and your hobby is writing and your hobby is reading, those are all basically the same thing. And so it's like training all the time. And so I think having a hobby that is not your avocation is a really important thing for any artist.
Sure. Although
And
puppetry, you're doing
yeah,
acting and
yes.
sculpting and
Although when I was doing puppetry, I was not writing.
oh,
I was not the writer. I did the design. I didn't do writing.
right. So you're not a full-time puppeteer anymore.
I am not. It kind of kills me. Moving to Chicago, you have to establish anytime you're in a new area. And we moved to Chicago 2.5 years ago, and it coincided with the writing career really taking off. And I just have been traveling so much that I haven't been able to take time to reestablish. So I still do occasional projects
Right.
for people who already know me, for contacts that I already have, uh, but I haven't done anything in Chicago. Um,
Right. Well, you're still a very well-rounded artist,
well,
since
thank you.
dressmaking can be viewed as an art.
I believe it is. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Um,
Thank you.
Kiitos katselijoille. Tällä kertaa tässä oli tämä Mary Robinette Kowalin haastattelu. Ensi kertaan.